The California coast looks forgiving at sunrise. The water glows silver beneath a low marine layer, waves rolling in clean, measured sets that make the risk feel manageable, almost ceremonial. Point Reyes had that reputation. Cold water, shifting sandbars, seal traffic, heavy enough to remind you that something larger often hunts here. But risk on this coastline is part of culture. It's studied, respected, then quietly pushed aside. 6 surfers paddled out just after first light, wetsuits sealed tight against the 55-degree Pacific. Among them was Aaron Cole, 29, local, disciplined, someone who checked tide charts like other people check messages. The buoy reports were clean, the swell moderate, the morning wind non-existent. The ocean felt thick but calm as they passed through the break and settled into the lineup beyond the sandbar. Gulls drifted overhead. The horizon lay flat except for the slow rise of approaching sets. Then the silence shifted in a way no one could name. The first seal surfaced 50 yards out, head snapping above water for less than a second before disappearing again. It wasn't playful. It wasn't scanning. It was reacting. 2 more broke surface moments later, cutting sharp angles toward shallower water, before vanishing beneath a swell. Something had pushed them upward from below. No one said the word out loud, but every one of them felt it settle into their chest. Aaron committed to the next incoming wave anyway. Surfers calculate risk through repetition, convincing themselves that probability is protection. The wave rose slightly steeper than the last. Aaron paddled hard, felt the lift beneath his board, and stood in one smooth motion, carving left along the face. The strike came from below with no warning, no fin, no cinematic breach. Just a violent upward detonation that snapped the board in half and erased him into whitewater. From the lineup it looked like collision, like a hidden rock. Then the water turned red. Cold Pacific water does not disperse blood quickly. It blooms thick and heavy, spreading outward in expanding clouds. One surfer screamed Aaron's name. Another began paddling toward shore without rhythm, just survival. Aaron surfaced once, his face breaking through foam, eyes wide and disoriented. He did not scream. He inhaled. Then the water around him convulsed violently as a pale shape rolled beneath, powerful and controlled. A dorsal fin sliced briefly through the red bloom before vanishing again. The ocean flattened. Too flat. The remaining surfers paddled in frantic silence, some abandoning boards entirely, others scrambling to catch broken waves toward shore. But the shark did not chase them. That was the first fracture in expectation. Great whites are ambush predators. They strike upward, disable prey, then often retreat, allowing shock and blood loss to finish the work before returning. Energy is conserved. Exposure minimized. Yet 5 minutes passed, then 10, and the dorsal fin surfaced again, not near the original impact site but near the lineup itself. Slow, deliberate, circling. The surfers who had reached waist-deep water stopped moving entirely, watching the triangular shadow carve wide arcs just beyond the break where they had been sitting moments earlier. It was not retreating toward deeper water. It was not vanishing into invisibility. It was holding position. Onshore, joggers and early beachgoers gathered near the tide line, phones raised, voices overlapping in panic. The red stain drifted slowly with the current, fragments of Aaron's broken board washing ashore in jagged halves. A rescue jet ski roared across the surface within minutes, lifeguards scanning for any sign of a body. The engine noise tore across the calm morning air, vibrating through the water in heavy pulses. The dorsal fin dipped briefly beneath the surface as the jet ski passed overhead. Then, 50 yards away, it surfaced again. Not fleeing, adjusting, watching. The pattern was wrong. It circled the feeding zone again, maintaining distance from engine noise but never abandoning the territory. It traced a wide, patient orbit just outside the sandbar, exactly where surfers wait for sets. On the beach, someone whispered what everyone felt, but resisted saying. It wasn't done. The Pacific continued rolling in steady waves under gray sky, indifferent to blood dispersing beneath its surface. But in that narrow stretch of water beyond the break, something ancient had not followed the expected script. It had struck. And instead of disappearing into depth like a shadow completing its work, it remained. The jet ski cut wide circles across the impact zone, lifeguards scanning the surface for anything that resembled a body, a hand, a fragment of wetsuit. The red bloom thinned but did not vanish, spreading in pale streaks with the outgoing tide. On shore, sirens grew louder, emergency vehicles pulling into the gravel lot above the cliffs. The remaining surfers sat on the sand wrapped in towels, staring at the water in a way that suggested they were still out there, mentally, replaying the strike frame by frame. The expectation, ingrained through years of coastal awareness, was simple. After a breach, after blood, the shark leaves. It drops back into deep water, into colder layers where seals travel in shadow. But 15 minutes had passed, then 20. And the dorsal fin surfaced again. Not randomly, not erratically. It traced the same arc just beyond the sandbar, following the contour where the seafloor dipped abruptly from shallow break to deeper trough. The shark was not confused. It was mapping. Sheriff's deputies began clearing the beach, pushing onlookers farther from the waterline. A helicopter arrived, hovering low, its rotor wash flattening small waves into chaotic chop. Through the glare, the shark's shadow became visible beneath the surface for brief seconds at a time. Massive, pale beneath, dark across the back, moving with controlled efficiency. The helicopter pilot reported the length over radio, at least 15 feet, possibly more. A mature great white, large enough to dominate seal colonies, large enough to make a single strike count. Yet it had not vanished after the first kill. It continued circling the same pocket of water, never straying more than 100 yards from the initial impact site. The tide was shifting now, pulling outward. Bits of foam and debris moved steadily toward open ocean. The shark adjusted its orbit with the current, staying within the red-scented corridor as it dispersed. Great whites rely on more than sight. Their ampullae of Lorenzini detect electrical signals, subtle muscle contractions in wounded prey. Blood amplifies probability. But the circling pattern suggested something else: territorial hold. Aaron's board fragments washed up in broken halves, fiberglass edges torn clean. No body followed. The ocean swallowed that detail entirely. Wildlife authorities arrived by late morning, scanning with binoculars from cliff vantage points. A warning closure was issued immediately for the entire stretch of coastline. Still, the shark remained. Every 10 to 15 minutes, the fin surfaced in a slow, deliberate pass. It did not thrash. It did not breach again. It simply maintained position. A marine biologist on scene murmured what others hesitated to admit. Sometimes, after a successful predatory event in rich feeding zones, Large whites remained to capitalize on secondary opportunity. Seals drawn to investigate, scavengers approaching, or movement triggered by human response. The water, once quiet, had become charged with engine noise, helicopter vibration, and concentrated human presence. To a predator attuned to disturbance, that meant activity. The helicopter eventually pulled back for refueling. The jet ski reduced its radius, conserving fuel while continuing visual search. And still the shark circled. Its dorsal fin cut clean arcs against gray water, unhurried, patient. The pattern was unsettling not because it was chaotic, but because it was controlled. By midday, the tide had shifted fully. The red trace had faded into diluted streaks barely visible from shore. That should have ended it. Instead, the shark moved closer. The next surface pass came inside the break line itself, closer than before, within 30 yards of where surfers normally sit, waiting for sets. It glided parallel to shore before dipping under again. On the sand, silence replaced panic. There is something more unnerving than a sudden attack. It is the refusal to leave afterward. The Pacific rolled on in steady sets, sunlight burning through marine haze. The beach evacuation completed. The sirens quieted. Yet beneath the surface, in that narrow trough carved by years of shifting sand and seal migration, the predator held water. Not frantic, not retreating, waiting. By early afternoon, the beach was officially closed, red flags planted along the access points and patrol vehicles blocking the lower parking lot. The helicopter returned with a refueled tank and tighter grid pattern, scanning not just the initial impact zone but the entire curve of the bay. The shark did not vanish under pressure. It adapted. Each time the rotor wash churned the surface directly overhead, the pale shadow dipped deeper for a minute or two, then reappeared farther down current, never more than a few hundred yards away, never abandoning the sandbar corridor. The water temperature hovered in the mid-50s, ideal for great white metabolism. Seal colonies dotted the outer rocks beyond the break, restless now, heads surfacing in tight clusters rather than scattered pairs. They sensed the change long before humans processed it fully. The shark's movement had rhythm. It traced the same elongated oval pattern with mechanical precision, parallel to shore, then arcing outward into slightly deeper water, then returning to the inside edge of the break. Marine biologists watching through long lenses exchanged uneasy glances. This was not a random post-strike linger. This resembled a feeding hold. Large whites sometimes remain in productive zones when prey density supports it. But human presence had altered the equation. Engine noise, search vibration, surface disturbance. Each of those elements introduces opportunity. Midway through the afternoon, something shifted again. A cluster of juvenile seals surfaced closer to shore than usual, bunching together in erratic bursts. One broke fully above water in a panicked breach before slamming back down. The helicopter pilot called it out over radio just as the dorsal fin appeared again, closer than any previous pass. It cut through the shallower green water inside the break, less than 20 yards from the foam line. Onshore responders shouted for remaining media crews to back away from the water's edge. The shark rolled just beneath the surface, its white underbelly flashing briefly through the green as it altered trajectory toward the panicked seals. Then it accelerated. The strike was faster than the morning attack, a vertical surge that split the surface in an explosion of spray and white foam. A seal vanished in a violent convulsion of water, red spreading instantly in a tight spiral. The helicopter pulled up sharply to avoid losing visual in the splash. When the turbulence settled, the shark did not retreat outward. It remained inside the break, rolling once beneath the surface, jaws working. This time, the feeding behavior was unmistakable. It was not an investigative bite. It was consumption. The ocean around the sandbar thickened again with color, darker than before. And still the shark did not leave. It patrolled tighter arcs now, no longer wide loops, but compressed circuits around the kill site. The behavior sent a different message than the morning strike. The first attack could have been mistaken identity, a single, opportunistic event. This was reinforcement. The predator had identified the sandbar as productive ground and was committing to it. As the afternoon light flattened toward evening, authorities debated closing adjacent beaches miles up the coast. The helicopter shadow tracked the shark until fuel forced another retreat. When aerial pressure eased, the dorsal fin surfaced again almost immediately, reclaiming the inside corridor. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if testing the reduced vibration environment. Seal activity diminished drastically. The outer rocks fell eerily still. The water inside the break looked deceptively calm to anyone unaware of the pattern unfolding beneath. But those who had watched since morning understood something fundamental had shifted. The shark was not simply passing through a migratory route. It was holding territory along the sandbar, holding it long enough for multiple feeding events, holding it despite aircraft noise and engines and shoreline crowds. In predatory ecology, territory is defined not by boundary lines but by repeated return. And by late afternoon, the water at Point Reyes no longer felt like neutral ocean. It felt claimed. By sunset, the light over Point Reyes turned copper, flattening the Pacific into a sheet of dull metal that reflected nothing clearly. The helicopter made one final pass before pulling away for good, authorities confident that darkness would push the shark deeper offshore. That assumption rested on habit more than certainty. Most large whites hunt in transitional light, dawn and dusk, using contrast between surface glare and deeper shadow to conceal a scent. As the rotor noise faded and the beach emptied fully, the ocean seemed to exhale. The red flags snapped weakly in cooling wind. Emergency vehicles pulled back to higher ground. Only 2 patrol trucks remained near the access road. The water inside the break went almost unnaturally smooth. Then, in the last visible band of light, the dorsal fin surfaced again. Not hurried, not aggressive. It cut a slow, unwavering line across the inside sandbar exactly where the morning strike had occurred. No helicopters, no jet skis, no vibration except distant surf. The shark had waited out disturbance. It resumed its pattern as if the entire day had been an interruption rather than a deterrent. Marine biologists watching through long lenses recorded the final pass before darkness swallowed detail. The fin dipped, then rose once more in nearly the same location, tracing an arc tighter than before. The water here held structure, submerged trough carved by years of shifting current, a seal highway between outer rocks and shallower feeding ground. The shark had identified convergence, and it had committed. Full darkness settled over the coastline, broken only by distant lighthouse beams. Most predators retreat into depth under night cover, dispersing into open water. But great whites operate differently along structured coastlines. They use topography like a fence line reading current and depth the way land predators read ridges and tree lines. Sometime after full dark, a deputy standing at the bluff edge reported hearing a violent splash beyond the break. No visual confirmation followed, only the heavy silence of ocean resetting itself. By morning, the beach remained closed. Word of the attack spread rapidly through surf communities and news cycles. Speculation filled gaps where certainty did not exist. Territorial behavior, seasonal seal surge, migratory anomaly. What none of the headlines captured was the duration. The shark had not vanished after first blood. It had not retreated under sustained mechanical pressure. It had circled. It had fed again. It had held the sandbar through a full tidal cycle. 3 days later, aerial surveys spotted a large great white along the same stretch of coast. Not necessarily the same individual, though length estimates matched closely, but following nearly identical arcs inside the same trough. Seal activity had resumed cautiously. Surfers had not. In predator ecology, territory is reinforced through repetition. Hold a feeding ground long enough, and it becomes encoded as reliable. The Pacific does not advertise boundaries. It offers gradients, temperature breaks, current seams, drop-offs invisible from shore. The sandbar at Point Reyes held all three. The morning of the attack, 6 surfers had treated that corridor as neutral water. By evening, it had become something else entirely. Aaron's name lingered in memorial posts and candlelight vigils, his board fragments kept by family, as physical proof of what the ocean took. But beneath the surface, there was no memory of him as an individual. There was only pattern, disturbance, blood, opportunity, return. Weeks later, when the beach reopened under cautious watch, surfers paddled out again at first light. Risk, once processed, always re-enters routine. The water looked forgiving once more, gray and steady under marine haze. Seals surfaced occasionally near the outer rocks, and somewhere beneath the layered cold and shifting current, a white shape moved along the trough, where bone and blood had once marked the water. It did not need to surface to claim it again. The circle had already been drawn,